Now, when we're looking at teaching leadership skills, often there's a couple of dimensions that we want to pay attention to. The first dimension, and we can kind of measure two things. We could measure the degree that we focus on task. That is, getting done what needs to get done in a day. Right? This is our task side. On the other side, we can focus on process. For our American cousins, process. For our Canadian friends, process. But process, which is basically how we get things done. So if you worked in an organization, some of you have probably worked in an organization at some time in your life, maybe you do right now, and you work for an organization that only focuses on the task. That is, getting done what needs to get done, even if it's over your dead body. So be it. That needs to get done. It's all about the measurables. Now, if you work for an organization that only focuses on the numbers, what needs to get done, and there's very little concern for how people interact or interrelate with one another, what could that lead to ultimately? In the short term, you might get some business results, but what might happen in the long term with that type of organization? High turnover, so people can get burned out because they're being pushed constantly, but not really given any positive feedback. What else could start to happen then? So we could get turnover. What would happen? Here we are focusing on the task and the numbers. What could start to happen to the numbers? They actually go down. So what ends up happening is these organizations that only focus on pumping out the work and only the numbers and no concern about how people interrelate, what ends up happening is the numbers actually start to go down, which if you think about it would absolutely drive that type of leader crazy because they think, hey, we just keep focusing on the numbers and the business will be taken care of. So high task and only task focus really isn't what we're all about from a leadership perspective. On the other hand, we could be in an organization that is high in process. That is, that it's all about how we feel with one another. Maybe we should start with a group hug in the morning. Make sure we're all super friendly. Maybe we should have more meetings to discuss when we should have the meeting, about having the meeting that we need to have in order to meet and discuss some things, to make sure that everyone's on side. If you're in one of those organizations where there's so much concern for how people interrelate and whether everyone's bought in and whether everyone's happy, what happens in those organizations? Are they high-performing organizations? Not really. Why not? What ends up happening in those organizations that really, they go out of their way to care for people and make sure that they're happy, why aren't people as driven in those organizations? It's too lax, right? In fact, in a minute, I'm going to be asking you to think of a time in your career when you were the most energized and turned on, and I'll tell you, it wasn't at the time when things were absolute at a stale, low level. It was probably when things were quite exciting and interesting. So what happens in those organizations, what we see, is that people tend to retire in place. They retire in place. They still have a number of years left to work, but they've decided to retire in place because the organization doesn't demand much of them, so they don't have to give much. So they kind of get in this demotivated rut, and they don't get the performance that they're looking for. On the other hand, if we were to work in an organization where there was both a high tendency to focus on task, that is, there were challenging goals, measurable results to go for, new things to learn, and at the same time, people were concerned with whether people were getting along, whether they were growing and developing and encouraging their growth. That would be the ultimate, wouldn't it? It's the situation where we both care for people and we demand things of them. That's when we get top performance from people. And so what does that mean for a working leader? Well, as a working leader, you've got to manage both the work and the outputs, and you also have to manage the way people are interacting to make sure that they buy in to your ideas and what needs to get done, and that the actual communications and the interrelations with people and those people skills are instrumental in getting the most performance from them and keeping them happy in their jobs.